it's Becky, and this week I decided to skip from reading SPFBO finalists to reading some of the entrants for this year's competition. SPFBO 6 has brought loads of fantasy books to the table that really caught my attention. I've picked 3 this week that just piqued my interest the most, and then I chose the other 2 for this week using a random number generator, as I wanted it to be a little bit fairer to maybe those books that I wouldn't immediately pick up, but I wanted to try out as well. If you want to see a list of entrants or you want to know more about any of these books, please do check out the master link in the description below. And if you want to read any of them with me, just message me, DM me, comment below, and we can definitely do that. We can definitely do some buddy reading. And if you want to read any of them, there's plenty of these books that are free in Kindle Unlimited, and there's plenty of books that are really cheap as well for ebook versions. The first book in my list was Emissary by E.B. Brooks. I was very lucky to receive a copy of this book from the author himself, who is really lovely as well. So after reading the blurb of this book, I was really intrigued because when I saw the cover, I initially thought it was going to be kind of a dystopian thing, but actually it's a world set in a fantasy world, and adventuring and questing are no longer a thing because the church is in control of that, and they're not setting out big quests and adventures as much anymore. But in this world, the church also manages respawning, and in this world you don't die, you just respawn to the point that you've already set on the map. And in my mind, that's kind of more futuristic, a little bit more sci-fi than fantasy, but we'll see where it goes because I'm not fully sure on what's going to happen. What I do know from the blurb is that there's 2 main characters, there's Ewan and Triana, and they both have very different sets of skills, and this means that they need to learn to depend on each other in different ways in order to kind of get the quest underway that they're going to go on. What I'm most interested in about is the kind of church plotline and what they're going to be up to and what they're doing and who they are, as Triana apparently knows some secrets which the church doesn't want people to know, and I would love to get into what these secrets are and how it affects Ewan. The prologue of Emissary actually doesn't even focus on Ewan or Triana at all. It focuses on a hero of this world, Maximilian, who is on a quest to defeat all the gems, who are like wizards in this world. But when he goes to defeat the final gem, he's being called out as by the bad guy as maybe heroes aren't as righteous as they seem to think they are. This is mainly due to a lot of the death that has come about from the war that he has kind of started and worked in, and this really sets up the rest of the book and the world which Ewan is in as a place that maybe isn't as good as it seems to be, and there's a lot of kind of cynicism in me when I'm reading it. However, our main character Ewan does look up to Maximilian and he wants to be a hero just like him. However, he disagrees a lot with the church's rules, which kind of puts him as a troublemaker. And this harms him in adventuring because he can't get as many perks as maybe the people who work for the church do. Alongside Ewan is his sister, Kate, and his family behind him. Kate is a crafter and she's very good at her job. She's skilled up in lots of different areas, and they make a good team in order to go out adventuring and crafting gear to help him. I really enjoyed the kind of tight-knit supportive family that is shown in this book. Both the parents are really supportive of both their children, despite maybe being worried for them as Ewan decides to get killed quite a lot despite respawning. I enjoyed how they were supportive but also realistic. So there was teasing, there was little disagreements, but they were all very supportive of each other. As we got more into Ewan's story, I realised what this reminded me of, and it reminded me of a video game. You respawn, there's skill points, there's inventories and menus in your head. It feels very much like we're in a simulation, a little bit like the Matrix, and I'm not quite sure where it's going with this or whether I'm correct. When you die, you go to your respawn point and you have to pay out in order to be respawned and to level up. If you respawn and you don't pay out, you do still respawn, but you can't skill up any more than what you've done previously. Fully dying is called logged out, and the menus is called the I want to say logos, but because it's logged out, I want to say logos as well. I'm not quite sure which one it is, but the logos, whatever it is the menu inventory screen where you can like see your skill tree and see your inventory and to IM people in your head. As someone who loves both video games, if you can't tell, and loves reading as well, I'm really excited to have read this because it's I mean, I did actually read another one that was similar for the 2018 finalists. I think it was that. And maybe it's just a genre that I'm just not reading a lot of, but I'm really intrigued to see how it connects the kind of video game and the book and the fantasy land into a reading experience. And whilst I don't know if they're actually in a video game and that's going to be part of the plot, I'm really excited to read more and to find out whether this is the case, as it seems to be the case. It seems to be really obvious to me as a reader, but it'd be great to see how this turns out. So then Ewan actually meets Triana, who I believe is someone from outside the video game, I'm not sure, and she has secrets that the church doesn't agree with, and he helps her as they try to capture her. I'm interested to see how Triana grows as a character, as there's not much known about her at the moment. I assume that's explaining Ewan's point of view, and I think Ewan also needs to grow up a little bit as well, and I can't wait to see how they both mature throughout the book. Whilst this is a fantasy setting, I think all the little bits like the inventory and menus and things like that all give it a more of a science fiction fantasy genre, as it does feel a little bit more techy and a bit more futuristic than your average fantasy book. I did already put this on my July to be read pile, as I want to read the entire book. So I'm glad to say that I did really enjoy it anyway, and I will be reading it for the rest of the month. And yeah, it was a great book. I think if you like video games, you probably would like this writing. The next book I'm reading is The Assassin's Gift by Claire Boston. Between the beautiful cover and the blurb, I was really intrigued by The Assassin's Gift, and I was really excited to read it as I wanted to know what was going to happen. Princess Leanne is an assassin, but she is also the nephew to the emperor and therefore a princess in her own right, and she is betrothed to the person that she has been told she needs to kill. There's a big question of whether she's being betrayed or whether she still needs to kill her target, and there's a lot of kind of mysteries behind what's happened in the court, and she doesn't quite understand what's happening. There's a lot of talk of kind of deception, and I'm really excited to see where it goes, because there seems to be a lot to unravel and there's really not a lot of information in the blurb at all. I'm probably going to put this onto my read the entire book list for TBR at the beginning, as I am just really interested, but we'll see after the first hour if I'm still interested. So Leanne is our main character, and she is a trained assassin, but she's not the smartest tool in the shed. I think this is a little bit of a culture thing, as she seems to have kind of an undying loyalty to the emperor, despite the fact that in the first 10% that I read of this book, there's so many red flags that he's not a good guy, and she really doesn't deserve to be betrayed by him over and over again because of her loyalty. I'm hoping that the rest of the book really develops her character and develops her thinking as a singular person. At the moment, I think she's been kind of brainwashed into believing that everything is for the good of the emperor and the emperor is in charge, and she's very focused on doing what makes him proud of her, and I don't think that's a good thing to do. So I'm hoping it does help, but in the first few chapters she really is quite annoying in the fact that she doesn't seem to learn from things that are happening around her that are quite obvious. However, this does highlight the kind of culture of the country she was born into, the propaganda around the emperor, and the propaganda around the other cultures surrounding them. The Bonomies are a patriarchal society where the emperor is the head of state. And in this world, Leanne has been told that they are the most civilized, the most educated, the most powerful, basically the best civilization in the world, and she truly does believe that. And then on the other hand, the Ruran, who are the clan that she is betrothed into, are barbaric and uncivilized and awful people who are always trying to start wars. And this propaganda is something she believes in heavily, and I really liked how when she meets them and she talks to them, she's starting to realize that maybe this isn't the case, and this kind of changes her point of view slightly, although at the beginning of the book we're still in a stage where she's maybe second guessing herself and not firmly believing it. So I am really intrigued to see how this changes in the book, as the world building leans heavily on the culture side of things and the differences between these two cultures and the emperor. Speaking of the Ruran, Temur is our other character that I'm assuming we'll see the most of, as he is the person Leon has been betrothed to. He is kind of the leader of the clan, and his leadership style is very hands-on and very different to that of the Empress. He's very involved with his community, and his relationships are very open with his family members, and it's nothing like what the Emperor and Leanne have as family members. Honestly, he seems to be a bit too much of a perfect character for an introduction to the Roran, because he totally subverts all the expectations that Leanne has towards them because of what she's been told. And I think her hesitancy to believe this is common, but I think because he's so perfectly not that she's taking too long to think this. And I think if maybe she was shown one of the clan members who was maybe a bit more barbaric and uncivilized, it would have made her second guessing herself so much a bit more believable. Another thing is that Leanne doesn't really do anything in this book. A lot of things happen to her. She is betrothed by the Emperor. She is betrayed by the Emperor when she's betrothed. And she doesn't even choose to go with Timur. She just wakes up after being attacked and she is already with him in his camp. So all these things are really just happening to her, and she's just kind of living her life and getting on with it. But I do think that maybe she needs a little bit more urgency, and I hope that as the book goes on, she grows into making her own decisions and she acts on them. The pace is quite fast, which is good, as we get a lot of information early on in the book. But I do think it would have been better if we had maybe a couple more chapters or just a little bit more time in the court of the Bonomies, because we don't fully understand why she's so loyal to the Emperor and her uncle. From the small bit of information we get, we find out that she doesn't really fit in at court, so it doesn't really make sense that she misses it that much. And I feel like if we'd spent a little bit more time there and we were given reasons to understand it, it would have been a lot more fitting and impactful. I also felt like the entire plotline was very going through the stages, and I'm hoping that it does kind of go off a little bit and explore the characters in a bit more detail, and maybe different relationships and different thoughts and feelings. As at the moment, it feels very stepping stone as to we start here, we need to get here, we need to get here, we need to get here. And I just felt like it could have been written a little bit better at the start. However, I am really enjoying it and I want to read more and find out what happens to Leanne. So I will probably be reading this even more. The next book I read was The Race to the Blackened Nevers by Douglas Bain. This book is also called The Woeless Wager, or that's the series title. It depends on which website you're on, so I was a bit confused. But I was definitely most intrigued because of the beautiful cover, and that's probably a problem because I didn't really like the book. So let's go from my first impression of the blurb was that I didn't know what's going on at all. The blurb really doesn't tell you anything. We don't have any character names. We just have kind of broad terms. There's about 5 different plot lines mentioned in the blurb, and it's all about how the gods are careening towards the Blackened Nevers, but we don't know what the Blackened Nevers are. And I'm intrigued. I wanted to know what's going to happen. I want to know how these plots intertwine and how the gods are involved and what the Blackened Nevers are. And it does have a sense of me wanting to know more, but it also doesn't quite give me enough that if I was in a bookstore I would have bought this, because I don't know what it's going to be about. I don't know if it's going to be something I'm going to like, and so this was definitely a cover choice for me. So it's probably good that the cover is good. So the book starts off giving you a glossary of the gods, mortuants and drudges, and I believe the mortuants are kind of mortals and humans. The gods are gods, and I have no idea what the drudges are. I don't think it's properly come up in the book yet. I assume this glossary is super helpful if you're reading a physical copy, but as I was reading an e-arc, it was really difficult to switch between them, so I didn't really use it much, and I probably should have because I have no idea what any of the characters are. So I'm just going to disclaim this particular first impressions in that I wrote down lots of names and I can't read my own handwriting, so if I say any wrong, that is probably why. The 3 characters that stood out to me in this book were Rosse, Conishan and Madrigan, and I have no idea if any of those names are correct. And thinking about it now, without looking at my notes, I can't remember what's happening, which is a good start. So Rosse is in the first prologue chapter, and he is kind of tricked or blackmailed into freeing the gods, who I assume will be racing towards the Blackened Nevers. Carnation is a military man who also sees visions and prophecies and goes into kind of trance-like state. And there's a scribe that writes down all of what he says during these trances. And so I assume it's important to the future of the book, but I'm not fully sure what happens. And then there's Madrigan, who is kind of a street kid, I believe. And his storyline revolves around Shiny Coffin Fit, which is like a little drug which helps people do magic. I think that's what I got from it anyway. And honestly, I don't know how any of these characters fit together. I don't know how any of these stories are going to be combined. And I think we only saw one of the characters twice in the first, I think it was like 10 or 15% that I read of the book. This is definitely the downside of me only reading the first hour of a fantasy book. However, I have read other books that have multiple point of views in this kind of test previously, such as Rewrite the Storm, and I seem to get a hold of their characters and what was going on much easier than I did for this one. So I don't know if it is me or whether it's the format or whether it is just the book. But because of this, I still don't know anything about what the book is about. I don't know what the Blackened Nevers are. I don't know what any of these characters are doing towards going to them. And I just don't even think we've seen all the point of view chapters yet. And I have no interest in the characters, I don't know what the plot is, so I probably just won't continue reading it. The next book I read was The Mid-Lich Crisis by Steve Thomas, and this is a bit of a different book because it's more of a humorous fantasy book than epic fantasy. Derek Darkbringer is a dread wizard, and he is going through a bit of a midlife crisis as he's in control of kind of his kingdom. He has an estranged ex-wife. No, he has an estranged wife, they're still married, and he doesn't like being called evil, but he does lots of evil sounding things. The book, I think, is going to be about how he tries to redeem himself. I don't know whether he's going to be successful or not, and apparently it's going to be very funny. I read one of the reviews that kind of compared him to more of a Terry Pratchett writer, and I've never read any of his books, so I'm not sure what to think of this. So after reading it, my first impressions was that this book isn't quite for me. I didn't think it was a bad book. I think I do prefer just epic fantasy books rather than humorous fantasy books. And also some of the humor wasn't funny, or at least subjectively for me it wasn't funny. So Derek is a lonely wizard who is trying to get on with his life, and after one more death he realizes that maybe he is in fact the bad guy. I actually really liked that we had a main character that was the bad guy because it's so different to usual books. However, he does kind of seem to understand that he's evil, but he doesn't like being called evil, but then he goes and does evil things. And I think his estranged wife actually mentioned this to him, that he needs to work on it and work on himself. And I assume this is what we're going to read about later on in the book. Speaking of his estranged wife, she doesn't really like him at all, but they've kind of got a oath which stops them from kind of not being married or being with other people. However, she is in love with Bryn Brightstorm, who is his nemesis, and both these characters really set up who Derek is in the story and show his personality and his actions. So what I liked about the book was that with these two characters, we were shown the personality of Derek, and we were shown that he is actually a bad guy through his actions, and we weren't just being told he was the bad guy. One of the things I liked about the book was that there's loads of fantasy elements that I haven't really seen in many other books, such as using kobolds, who are little creatures that you often see in D&D games rather than books or film. And these creatures like to do like harmless pranks, such as cleaning the gutters and weeding the garden, and they're kind of helpful, but they're not trying to be. I really like these because I have not read about them in any other book before, and I was just really interested to see how they were used in the book, as well as the fact that they had a mother called Princess who actually really helped Derek and is probably a main character in the rest of the book. Another creature was also Sleepy the carnivorous horse, which I wanted to mention just because it's a carnivorous horse called Sleepy. And the estranged wife gets on the horse and really likes the horse, and apparently the horse is really nice despite being carnivorous. And that kind of humorous take on fantasy creatures of them being named really scary things, but being really nice and soft actually interests me, because that's the same as kind of real life. So it had lots of unique aspects, and I would say if it was cleaned up a bit, so it's not a book for kids, it's an adult fantasy book. However, it's humorous, and I think maybe some of the humour would have fit better in a kids orientated book, but then some of the things in the book would not have been good for kids at all. So I'm really in two minds about it, and I probably won't continue reading it just because it wasn't for me. I do want to disclaim, like, it's not a bad book at all. It was actually really well written, and I think there was a lot of effort put into it. I just think I don't like humorous fantasy books. And the next and final book on this video is The Owl at the End of the World by Staś Rolla. The Owl at the End of the World is a dystopian novel where our main character is a lone wanderer. She's trying to go further south away from the volcanoes and the kind of destruction that's happening on the world in hope for finding a better place and finding people. But the story of the owl keeps following her around, and this owl is supposedly, by prophecy, is meant to rise at the end of the world and to help. However, she is also a descendant of the owl, as she's not fully human, and that's the basis of the blurb really. I don't know what's happening in the book further than that, and I don't know if she's going to do something to bring the owl to life, or it's going to be her that's going to have to rise. So after reading it, the book isn't going to be long at all. I managed to get 30% in an hour, which means it's probably like a 3-hour sitting. You could probably finish it off pretty easily. We learn that our main character is called Grey. She is a lone wanderer, but she wasn't always a lone wanderer. She used to have a family, which she doesn't anymore. She is also an artist, and she is a descendant of the owl, which means she's not entirely human. And this is not different in this world. It's just kind of known that some people are owls, and she doesn't seem to meet anyone who despises her because of it. The world we're in is very dystopian. It's dying. I assume climate change is a big reason, as there's volcanoes erupting. It's really hot. The storms happen infrequently. The sea is kind of poisoned and drying up. It feels very much like a basis on different climate change, although I don't know if there's going to be a more magical reason for the world dying that's brought later in the book. I would say the book contains a lot of description of the world, and it doesn't really help. There's a lot of description of a lot of different things, and it does just kind of fill the pages. It doesn't push the story forward. I managed to get 30% into this book, and I have no idea what the plot line is or what's going to happen. The character hasn't changed at all. We've just spent 30% of the book learning about her. We haven't even met any other characters yet. It's just Grey and just her moving from place to place and discovering new things and doing things and learning about her with some flashbacks to her childhood. Because of this, I can't even do like a proper first impressions because I just wouldn't know what to talk about. So I just will not be reading this book, as it just wasn't good. It wasn't fun to read. It doesn't captivate me. There's no mystery that I want to find out about. I've assumed a lot of things just to get it over with. And yeah, it's not a book for me. So I think 2 out of 5 books isn't too bad for books that I want to continue reading. I've already started reading more of Emissary, and I'm excited to read more of The Assassin's Gift as well to find out more about both their characters. And so far I'm quite happy with SPFBO 6's Entrants. I've worked out how many books I should be rereading per week, and it's quite a lot. So I'm excited to continue this series, and I'm really hoping you're enjoying it. If there's any books on the master list that you want me to read first or sooner rather than later, please do let me know. If there's any books that you want to read alongside with me, then please let me know as well. And I'm really hoping you enjoy these videos, and I will see you again soon.